Save the Stub.
Hi, and welcome to week 2 of Save the Stub. Thank you for tuning in. This week I'm joined yet again by my 2 co-hosts, Rory McNair.
How you doing, Harry?
Hi, mate. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm ready for some quality film discussion.
That's the spirit. And also the novice mind of Will Foster.
2 weeks in a row. Hi, Harry. How are you?
We get to 5 weeks, and I'll count you as a semi-professional, and then we'll be absolutely fine.
Thank you. Appreciate that. I need a medal or something.
And this week we are looking primarily at the new release One Night in Miami on Amazon Prime. It's a film focusing on a fictional discussion about the civil rights movement in the 1960s, featuring key figures such as Muhammad Ali and Malcolm X. So, shall we get into it?
Let's go.
Film of the week.
So this week we watched One Night in Miami, which came out last year and is a film focused around the 1960s civil rights movement in America. It's mostly about a fictional conversation between 4 quite big icons at the time. So you've got Malcolm X, obviously what everyone will know, Cassius Clay, later to be renamed Muhammad Ali, Jim Brown, who is one of the best American football players of all time, really, and Sam Cooke, who, for me, and I know for a couple of you guys as well, was probably the least known of the 4 men as a famous musician at the time. What did you think of the film, Will? First impressions?
Yeah, so it's difficult for me to say that it was an out-and-out good film or great film. I think, firstly, we need to acknowledge the concept is it's a really interesting concept. And one thing we all talked about before we recorded, well, me and Rory did, was this actually being a play. So this was in theatres quite some time ago, written by a guy called Kent Powers. Interestingly, this film links quite heavily to what we did last week, which, if you've listened to the episode, is quite surprising. So Kent Powers co-wrote the script for Soul, which was the Pixar film that we watched last week.
Oh, did it? I didn't actually know that.
Yeah, and he wrote the play One Night in Miami, of what this film is based on. So yeah, interesting link straight away there. But having not known that, and then kind of realising that after I'd watched the film, that it was originally for theatres, I think it's quite easy to tell that was the case, just because of the concept. So a lot of the film takes place in one room or in a hotel. And I don't know if that helped or hindered kind of the production, to be honest. But yeah, like I said, acknowledge the concept. It's loosely fictional, isn't it, guys? But actually these people all did know each other in real life, and they were friends.
Yeah, it's sort of a weird one, because watching it, you can immediately tell that this is something that would be suited really well to sort of a stage performance. You could see this entire thing played out in one room over the course of a couple of hours, and that makes sense. But I feel like if you're going to bring it into cinema, you've almost got to take the artistic liberty of you've got more scope to work with. So yes, a lot of it's set in this hotel room, essentially, which isn't a spoiler or anything. But it doesn't really... It's not a good vehicle for you to really watch a film through, I don't think. And there are occasional bits where they do go outside, or there's scenes that aren't entirely separate in this sort of motel complex. But it doesn't fit an interesting film experience to me, especially given the characters and the frame of mind and the timing that they're sort of trying to work with throughout the film. And given, without saying any spoilers, the ending sort of 2 minutes, where they sort of explore quite a lot of the consequences of actions from that night, et cetera, et cetera. Rory, what were your thoughts?
I think it's interesting that you say the word spoilers, because I feel like it would be really hard to spoil this film. I kind of found, like we were saying, more suited to a theatre production. I feel like modern audiences, this is the kind of content that's more suited to a documentary. I think it's generally quite hard with biopics and kind of true to life character films for me to hit them spot on, especially with 4 characters like that. I felt kind of throughout, it felt a little bit forced and a little bit like 4 guys kind of cosplaying civil rights heroes. But then
not to diminish their achievements or anything, but
no. Well, that's the thing. They are icons, and you have to respect those achievements. But I feel like it would be more compelling if I was hearing it either from them. I know 3 of them have passed now, or from kind of people who knew them, people who were in the same kind of circle. But I did enjoy the film. I thought it was interesting. I think the kind of conversations they were having need to be had and need to be heard by the whole world, which is why they've become so kind of iconic.
I think that was kind of what Regina King, the director, who is an actor that I really am a fan of anyway. She's from a TV show, one of my favorite ever TV shows called Southland from back in the early 2000s. I think that is what she was going for, the core principle. But I also think that given that this is entirely fictionalized, but plays with real characters who were aware of these situations, blah, 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 it's almost kind of harder to have an empathy or an inside take on what they're saying, because I can't believe the conversations to be entirely true. Like, I think it's all really well acted. I think Leslie Odom and Kingsley Benadir as Malcolm X and Sam Cooke are so good. Honestly, I think they're really well cast. Leslie Odom can sing really well. He does it in Hamilton, he does it again in this. But I don't know if I sort of 100% believe the authenticity of what they're saying to one another. Like, they might have said that. I can't say they wouldn't have. But when it's entirely fictionalized, you can't have that sort of biopic, this is a true story, slapped on it for people to really think, well, that hits home. And that sort of, I don't know, diminished it a little bit for me, which I think seems harsh, because there probably are real conclusions that Ken Powers has come to, but it doesn't feel for me like I was entirely watching something that is based entirely in fact.
Yeah, I think why I would love to have seen this in theatres and why I think it's so suited for theatres is because, I'm quite a novice of going to like a theatre. I don't really do it much, but I tried to more recently. And when you're there and the actors are in the same room as you, you get such a sense of emotion and tension between them on stage that it's really quite powerful. So you can really get into dialogue, and kind of, because the nature of a theatre is the set's kind of fixed, right? They can't change what's going on in the background, and you're sat in one seat, so you can't, change perspective or camera angles. It's really about that relationship between actors. And I think I agree with you, Harry. The acting was really pretty good, and I was impressed. But I saw online a lot of criticism, or not a lot, but one of the main criticisms was some of the dialogue was just a bit too long. Some of the conversations I felt were a bit more difficult to listen to than others. I think in the really intense moments when, Malcolm X is really, really upset and he's trying to get across a message, the acting was superb. Agreed with that. And similar with Sam Cooke, because, Sam is the character that probably clashes most with the others in terms of his views are more different, particularly to Malcolm's, than the other two. And because of that, we got to see a bit more of a dynamic acting performance from those two actors. But the other two, were kind of a bit more in the middle. And although they were well acted, I think at points that kind of let their characters down a little bit, because John Brown was quite a reserved character, I thought, in the film. And he was kind of one that was a bit more of a peacemaker and a bit more on the fence, kind of seeing both sides. And Muhammad Ali, his character was, a bit more jokey and jovial, but had less serious moments in it, I thought. And but overall the acting was great. I just think some of the script or the dialogue they were given at times was a bit limited.
I mean, Rory, would you go so far as to say that this film was actually sort of an emotionally powerful film? Because I think there are scenes where first 10 minutes, I'll be dead honest, I was straight up bored. Some of the script was really badly and clunky. But then there's one particular line in the first scene with Jim Brown that everyone who's seen the film will know I'm talking about. That is really impactful. And you sort of had like a sickening sense that it was coming, but you didn't want to expect it. And there were moments like that in the film, again, with Sam Cooke and Malcolm X clashing, and the final scene where Sam Cooke's on that talk show, and there's sort of a brief recounting of history from that point on, were powerful. But a lot of the middle part for me, especially, was sort of meandering. It was a little bit like filler for a few main big plot points.
I think it was a powerful film. I think emotionally, it did grab me once it got going. I agree. I think the kind of first half an hour for me, I was like, it established the characters, and I was kind of like, where is it going to go? Is it going to be a kind of black and white plot where we see certain events and kind of things happen and that lead to consequences? Or is it going to be a kind of, here are your characters, and then what we kind of get, which is basically just like an hour and a half of conversation, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I think, like we've said, in theatres, that can work. Dialogue heavy stuff can be made to kind of be impactful if it's put in the right surroundings. I think there are moments that it came off. I think the kind of condensed nature of what this film was trying to get across, or how the film was trying to get things across, had its good moments, had its bad moments. I think I liked the scene on the roof of the hotel. I thought that was quite good. Quite kind of, I know it's just them moving around in the space, which again, when it comes to theatre, is something that's quite important. But I thought it kind of kept things going and kept me engaged, which worked well.
Yeah, what I will say, Harry alluded to it earlier, there were moments when they did kind of like leave the room and they were in different locations. And I think that was needed. I think this film just about kept me interested in terms of keeping them on the move and not exactly in the same place. I think Cassius Clay and Sam Cooke, when they went to the liquor store, firstly, I think that scene looked really good. All the lighting and the way they shot that was really interesting and nice. And the rooftop scene for me was another highlight. I think it was a bit more candid. We had a moment of real tension on the roof, and that was kind of broken by a bit more of a jokey relationship between all the characters, which was nice, and I think that helped as well.
I think one thing that was done fantastically well with the direction of the film was the kind of sense of danger you got when it came to Malcolm X, and like his kind of experience in his surroundings. Because I think the whole film, he was like, you could sense he was kind of on edge and a bit uncertain of how safe he was. Obviously, coming from me, like we're all quite kind of detached from like the 60s civil rights movement in America, and our kind of age, I think. But one thing obviously I did know about Malcolm X was how he died and the fact he was like assassinated. And I think it was similar with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., but the fact that he was kind of constantly in danger, and it got to the point where he was kind of constantly under threat, especially at places like hotels when he was staying at places to give talks. The whole film, I kind of thought, is something terrible going to happen at this hotel? And the scene where he kind of goes outside to make that phone call, but kind of looks around, and there's just like an air to the film that makes you really on edge. Yeah,
it's like a constant reminder of why we're watching this film and why the film exists in the first place. I agree that constant reminder was good, and it was also quite necessary, I think, for the film to be shot as it was.
Because production value wise, this film does look good. It looks like a 60s period piece, and I think they probably helped themselves by having so few scenes outside of that hotel room that they've actually got to spend, because there's all the things about, you got to get period era cars, costumes, you've got to make the hotels and the buildings look right. And they do, obviously effort was put into those, which makes it look good and looks authentic. But then my issue sort of came with a degree of artistic liberties taken, because again, it comes back to this point for me of, you're trying to make this film empathetic and impactful, whilst also accepting that you have not trivialized, fictionalized some of the facts to a degree. But then when sort of the timeline doesn't add up, because there's things about Sam Cooke dies fairly soon after this film's set and things like that. This is all set around a fight that Cassius Clay, Muhammad Ali, did actually have in real life. So the timeline's all a little bit all over the place as well. So again, there I was sort of watching and thinking, am I supposed to believe this entirely as true, or am I watching this as if it's a fictionalized account that would have happened but didn't happen but could have happened? And I don't know, it just sort of, it took me out a little bit when I realised that it didn't all sort of fit together as it should historically, and almost should be a case of they weren't all in the right place at the right time, rather than, oh no, this actually wasn't a thing that ever really was going to happen, but it might have done in another time, in another world.
I think you kind of have to treat this film like it were a play, in the sense that going into it, you have to give yourself up to the, like you've said, the kind of artistic license, the realities that kind of get blurred with what they need to get their message across. And if you can do that, I think it is a really good film. I think, an hour and 3/4 maybe stretches your attention span when a lot of it is just dialogue you've got to get through, but they are important messages that I think we should appreciate.
Yeah. So Regina King, guys, this is her first full-length feature film as a director. Just for people listening who don't necessarily know who she is or the significance of this being her first job. Well, obviously, anyone's first directing job as a full-length feature film is pretty important anyway. But yeah, Harry, you kind of alluded to it earlier. Could we elaborate a bit more on who Regina King is?
So, I mean, she is a famous actor in her own right, you know. So the first thing I knew of her being in was this Southland TV show. But even the last couple of years, she's had big roles as other things. You know, there was this series called If Beale Street Could Talk. I'm pretty sure she might even be a co-writer or something on that as well. She was in the Watchmen HBO TV show that came out last year, American Crime. So she's in loads of stuff. So I think she's sort of taken a jump to do some directing, which a lot of the big actors do these days. You know, it's something that is far more accessible than it used to be because it's almost assumed that you could write your own script and produce your own films. And especially if you spend enough time on sets, you at least know what directors are doing. And I'd still say that for a first, you know, it's a heavy topic for a directorial debut, no question. And adapting a play on top of that is hard enough in my mind to translate onto screen. So I would still say she's done a good job, but I still felt that there were too many points in it where it was meandering or was too play-centric for me to think this does really well on screen and this is going to be a film that is successful off its own merit rather than, you know, the individual cast being really good at their roles or it looking really good or anything like that. So I don't know, it's hard for me to gauge overall what I actually feel. I mean, how would you rate this, Will? If you were going to say, I've got to put like a finite level on what I've seen here, what would you be giving this?
So as a rating, I'd probably be going for about 7, mid-7, probably 7.4 to 7.6. But, you know, in terms of what Regina did, when I finished the film, I was kind of thinking, is this like a fairly straightforward first director role, or is it actually quite a difficult thing to do? Because on one hand, you know, that this is already a different art form in the sense that it's been written for theatre and it's probably been quite successful. But then actually having your first full feature film and having to direct that and convert it to screen, that could be quite difficult. I think for me, I don't know if this is valid or not. You guys might have more of an opinion, but I think because we were in one location and we've alluded to it already, the pacing at points was a bit slow. It would have been nice for me if she'd used more tools as a director to kind of keep the viewer a bit more interested, i.e. using a few more experimental camera angles or perspectives when we were in that room. I think as a director, you can probably take that license to make those kind of calls. And, you know, it's her first job in this kind of role. So fair play for keeping it relatively safe and straightforward, because she was ultimately fairly successful. I think that you can't really criticize her for much. But if I had one thing to say, I'd probably like to see that again. And I think that would have really taken the film to another level. You've got a really good topic and subject that you're talking about in the film. The acting was great. So I think to level it up, you know, just the composition could have been slightly better. But yeah, overall mid-7, I think good film, and would recommend people to watch it if they'd not seen it. Okay.
Rory, what do you think? I get the vibe that you're not as high on it.
I struggle. I think if I were to give it a rating, I'd give it somewhere like a 6.4, 6.5. I think, like you mentioned, Harry, it's a hard topic. It's kind of a meaty topic to get into in your directorial debut. And I think now we're seeing a kind of resurgence of the civil rights and social justice movement, especially in America. So I think the message is really important, but I don't know how well this film serves as a kind of continuation of that message. I don't know how relatable. I think a lot of the things, a lot of the conversations are kind of conversations that need to be had and need to be seen by the world to kind of start approaching racism. But I don't know how accessible a film like this is to the modern audience in its form. I think if it were a documentary, it would probably get picked up immediately and kind of become, it would get a little bit more respect maybe, or attention.
Yeah.
If it were a play, I think you miss a lot of the modern audience, especially in a pandemic. There are no playhouses open. But I think it would be more effective and more kind of more compelling. I think it's still a good film, and just for the messages and the characters who I did enjoy seeing, I'd still recommend watching it and still want to watch it. But I think it does fall short in certain areas.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is worth the casting on this. Especially, I was reading some of the ways people spoke about it. The main plus point was really how faithful to their characters the cast were. So people were saying Leslie Odom Jr. playing Sam Cooke had his mannerisms and things when he's on stage, down to a T, and was still acting in the same way that he held himself. And even in Kingsley Ben-Adir doing Malcolm X, I felt like he did remind me of Malcolm X in all of the, clips and sound bites I've heard of Malcolm X in the past. Now, I don't know a lot about, I'm an American football fan, but Jim Brown, I don't think I've seen many videos of Jim Brown doing interviews or anything like that. And then Muhammad Ali is, he's Muhammad Ali. You know what the man's like. So I do think you've got to give a certain amount of credit to how good the acting was, even if you can't almost put that down to the quality of the film itself. But I do agree with you. I think it is sort of a middling 6. I wanted to like it. That was the thing. And there were bits where I was like, if you had a film entirely like this, I'd be thinking that is a great film you've made. But there's too much sort of gappy filler between it, where you're either going to lose an audience or lose me, to a point where you've got to do almost another bang, I've got to do a shock scene, or bang, I've got to do something that's, really impactful for me to really think, wow, that was a film that's worth me either seeing again, recommending, telling someone about, past it being a civil rights film that almost gets, this is going to sound awful, but almost gets plaudits just for tackling a topic that most people would shy away from. I don't know. I don't want to say that's a harsh thing to say, but when you approach difficult topics, you are making a conscious decision to be tackling people's prejudices or views on certain topics. So if you're then going to do that, I almost feel like you've got to do such a good and justified job that you've warranted taking the time to approach that topic, rather than I just want to give my take on, any of these sort of cultural movements that are going on. So, I'm not going to consign it down there with the bang average films. I still think it's above that. I think production value, the acting, whatever. But I think there had to be something, I could see it on stage. If this was on stage, I imagine this would, this slap. But just for a film, I think it's a middling 6 at best. Yeah. I think that's as far as you can really go with saying, this is maybe exactly what she set out to direct, but it's still not a groundbreaking film in those respects for me, I wouldn't say.
Maybe I should change my rating, guys. You guys are you slating me here. No, I'll stick to what I said, but probably the 7.4. I agree with what you guys say, and I don't think well, for one, I'm not compelled to rewatch this film anytime soon. And secondly, Rory, I think you're spot on. I think when you come away from this film, and why I probably gave it a bit higher than you guys was, I think the impact it has is good, but it's not necessarily really about the film. It's kind of about the topic that the film talks about. Maybe I let that influence my score giving a bit, but I'm going to stick to it. I think 7.4, just for the fact that it's so direct about discussing civil rights. And I think I don't think we've actually mentioned this when we've talked about the film, but the film is all about kind of how these characters perceive their own struggle with the civil rights movement and how they think they can affect it. And I think that, we said the concept is interesting, but that is the concept. And I think the actors executed that pretty well. And yeah, really interesting idea. But, for theatre, Harry, I'd love to go see it at the theatre if you're up for it. We're probably not going to get that opportunity.
Sorry, Rory, mate, you're not invited. Not my fault. Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, we are, I guess we are a film podcast, but we are talking about it. Do you know what I mean? It has had that effect that I suppose is desired in starting a conversation, at least for us three who are quite detached from it. So I suppose in that respect, Regina King, you've done a bang up job. But would I watch it again? It's not for me to say.
I think the thing is, you can review or critique this film as a film or as a message or as both. And I kind of understand why, like Will, why you rate it higher, because I think that message is so important that, especially going into the film expecting a message like that, it does a really good job. And kind of opening itself up to dialogue, it does a great job. But if you're being really critical, looking at the kind of directorial aspects of it, trying to kind of quantify how well it does at communicating that message, I think you do start to see things that bring it down.
It's going to do well at the awards, though, guys, isn't it? Right? I think.
Do you think? I'm not sure. This is the thing, because normally I would tip these sort of films as they've almost got America is a real guilt complex when it comes to awards. So anything that really plays on heartstrings, especially for things like the Oscars, they nearly always do well. You know, I can think of any of the big, films of the last 10 years that tackle issues of things like racism, slavery, rights for discriminated groups often do well. But I would be interested to see how this does, because it's still down the lower end of things like budgeting and stuff like that. It's not massive name actors. There are some big names, don't get me wrong, but it's not one of the ones where you've got, proper A-listers slapped all over it. And it's an Amazon Prime production rather than sort of an individual production house altogether. And obviously these streaming services, as we discussed last week, are coming more and more into the foreground when it comes to, awards and actual critical acclaim. But I'm not sure. I'd be interested to see. I will be interested to see.
You can correct me if I'm wrong, but let's cut this if it's not right, guys. But when I was researching, I don't know if nominations and stuff for awards that are coming up have already been made, but I think a lot of the acting roles had been nominated from what I'd seen. But, again, I'm not sure if that's correct or not. I can see that being what it would get nominations for rather than as a whole production.
Yes, they're mostly things for casting. So you've got Leslie Odom Jr. essentially has been nominated twice. He's got an SAG nomination and a Golden Globe for Sam Cooke. And then you've got one for director for Regina King in the Golden Globes. And then some stuff like for songs and things like that. But in terms of sort of like whole film nominations, which I'm not saying that they're the benchmark you set like a good film by, but, it very much speaks of the film as a whole. If the actors receive the nominations where the film doesn't, the film as a whole hasn't really been nominated for a whole bunch of things. But obviously there's still a lot of time left for that to change and for more nominations and things to come through. But yeah, well, that was One Night in Miami.